something happens. You know, all year we've been looking at this theme of the road less traveled, and it's not a cruise, right? The road less traveled is not a cruise. It's not an all expense paid vacation, is it? That's not the road less traveled. The road less traveled has to do with following Jesus in a couple major ways. He said to us that we are to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and spirit. And when that happens, something begins happening in us where we lose control. You know, we cede control over to God. And then he says there's a second command, and that's to love your neighbor as yourself. And here's the problem with that command. Sometimes our neighbor is not the kind of person that we necessarily like. Is that correct? I mean, how many of you bumped into some human beings that you would rather dissociate yourself from? You know, you'd like to X them out of your list. They're not going to get your Christmas card, right? You're saying, oh boy, I would like to tell them, you'd like to give them a piece of your mind, but you're afraid that you'd lose something in the process. You know, this is what's going on. You know, I think some of us may be Dr. Seuss fans. How many know this book called The Sneetches? Are any of you familiar? Very good, because you have a 7-year-old, so you sneeched, and here we have a teacher. You know, Melissa, I was told that this book, written in 1953, in 2007, it was selected as one of the top 100 children's books of all time. It's a great story. Sneetches, it starts out, and I'm not going to do the whole thing, but now the star-bellied Sneetches, star-bell Sneetches had bellies with stars, and the plain-belly Sneetches had none upon theirs. Those stars weren't so big, they were really so small, you might think such a thing wouldn't matter at all. But because they had stars, all the star-belly Sneetches would brag, we're the best kind of Sneetch on the beaches. With their snoots in the air, they would sniff and they'd snort. We'll have nothing to do with a plain belly sort. And whenever they met some, when they were out walking, they'd hike right on past them without even talking. When star-belly Sneetches had Frankfurter roasts or picnics or parties or marshmallow toasts, they never invited the plain belly Sneetches. They left them out cold in the dark on the beaches. They kept them away, never let them come near, and that's how they treated them year after year, until along comes this guy named Sylvester McMonkey McBean, and he is known as the fix-it-up chappie. He's a bright guy. He realizes there's this social problem, and so he's going to make some money off of it. And so he says, I've devised a way. I can take I can for $3 I can put a star on your belly. So all the ones without, oh yeah, they signed up for $3, and so everyone was having stars, and so the people that originally had the stars said, well gosh, can we get our stars taken off? Because we don't want to be, and so he said, yeah, I can do that for $10. And so he began this thing going where everybody was either getting stars put on or taken off. And this is what happened. He says, then when every last cent of their money was spent, the fix-it-up chappie packed up and he went. And he laughed as he drove in his car up the beach. They never will learn. No, you can't teach a Sneetch. But McBean was quite wrong. I'm quite happy to say that the Sneetches got really quite smart on that day, the day they decided that Sneetches are Sneetches, and no kind of Sneetch is the best on the beaches. That day, all the Sneetches forgot about stars and whether they had one or not upon theirs. It's a powerful story, isn't it? It really is the gospel message. It's a message that we have not gotten inside of us very well, however. And one of the institutions that doesn't have that message going real well is the church. Remember what Dr. Martin Luther King said? 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. And it's because we are comfortable with people who are like us. We are not comfortable with people who come from other socioeconomic areas, other races, if they're different, we're not as comfortable. So we want to be comfortable, right? Isn't that the goal? And yet that's not the cruise ship that God has designed for us. It's a road less traveled. It's a road to the cross ultimately. And maybe before going to the cross, we have to go to a place called Samaria. Samaria is a place where half-breeds exist. It's a place where they're religiously and ethnically different. It's a place where we don't really want to go. Apparently, the history of Samaria goes this way. There was a king by the name of Omri who went to a guy by the name of Shemer and purchased land from him, and it was called Shemer's place or Samaria. And his son, Ahab, decided to put the capital city of the northern kingdom in this region, in this area, and they called it Samaria. And by the way, another name, Samaria, also is related to the verb shaman, which means to watch, to guard, to keep. So the Shemer's place was a watchtower place. It was a place where you could come and see what was going on, and it was a fortified watchtower place. And this is where the northern kingdom of Israel said, this is our place of refuge and hope. Where the southern kingdom said, gosh, you guys are moving against the will of God. Really, the place to worship is Jerusalem. And you guys are saying Mount Gerizim is the place to worship. You set up your own place to worship. You're not moving in the right direction. And then eventually the northern kingdom was demolished by the Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrians deported a lot of the people and then sent a lot of Assyrians into this region, and they intermarried, and Israel as a nation sort of was done away with. And what was left was this half-breed community of people called Samaritans in Samaria. And these Samaritans only believed that the first 5 books of the Old Testament were scripture. And there was just a lot of things about them that good Jews would say we don't have nothing to do with. And when the Jews were conquered, when Jerusalem was conquered, these people in Babylonia and Babylon, they maintained the purity of their doctrine, the purity of their racial heritage, and when they came back 70 years later, they said, we're going to maintain our purity. We're going to do everything to maintain our purity, and one of the ways is to make sure that we don't become like those Samaritans. We're going to have nothing to do with those Samaritans. So in Jesus' time, Samaria was just an isolated area. It was plunk right between Galilee and Jerusalem. And if you went from Galilee to Jerusalem or Jerusalem to Galilee, you should go through Samaria, but good Jews would go around it because they had bypassed it. They had nothing to do with Samaritans. But Jesus, it said, had to go to Samaria. He had to. This was part of his game plan. It's part of God's game plan for him. And oops, I think I jumped a slide. Can you jump me back? It says, now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John. Even back in Jesus' day, apparently there's this jealousy about who's doing better spiritually. Isn't that a great thing to be concerned about? Although it is in fact not Jesus who was baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee, his hometown, his region, that he was going to be setting up shop. And so as he goes back, it says he had to go through Samaria. And he didn't have to in one sense, but he had to in another. He had to because this is where people who were least like him were located. This is where people that he probably didn't necessarily get along with were located. This is where those people that you would not be sending Christmas cards were located. This is the place that Jesus said, I have to go. I have to go there. Because I'm not going to be stretched if I stay where I'm at. I've got to go where I'm going to be stretched. This is a calling for each of us. We're all called to go to Samaria. There's a Samaria for all of us. It's not the place we want to go, not the people that want to hang with. And Jesus, when he goes there, he goes and comes to a well in the middle of the day and bumps into a person. It says he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon, and that's important because it's the hot part of the day. It's right when the sun is blazing. And it says, when a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" And his disciples had gone into the town to buy food. Jesus was breaking all sorts of taboos at this point in time. He's reaching out to a Samaritan, first of all. He's reaching out to a woman, and it's a woman in the middle of the day. It's a sun-baked woman. Have you ever seen sun-baked people walking around? You know what I'm talking about. I saw this one sun-baked woman yesterday, just hot part of the day. She's walking around and not walking in a straight line with a bag in her hand. Sun-baked. It's a sun-baked woman. And Jesus is connecting to her. It's one of the reasons why I love you, Brett. Brett sort of says this is his mandate. This is what God has called him to do. It's kind of interesting. Jesus sends his disciples and says, "You guys go off and get some food." He had a ministry to conduct. He wanted to go down deep with this person. We were talking this morning at Beach Church, and Charles Cheek was speaking. He says, you know, the greatest gift we can give to a homeless person is not more stuff. It's our time. It's a relationship. It's care. It's love. We can, I tell you, the greatest need that all of us have are friends. We need friends. That's the need. And it doesn't matter where we're coming from in life. That is our great need. And Jesus spotted this. And you know how you build a friendship. Jesus said, "Can you do something for me?" Boy, that puts things in a different context too. Can you give me something to drink? It's a step. It's a step in building a relationship. And the woman says to him, "You're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan woman. You're not supposed to do this. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." But Jesus was going to break down these kind of walls. He wants to. He wants us to. He wants people who follow him to do this. And so in the process, Jesus goes on to say, well, you know, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asked you for drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. In fact, I think what all of us want more than anything else is the gift of God. I think that's why we're here this morning. I don't think we're here to be entertained, although I tell you, we actually do have a professional entertainer. I mean, I'm a Christian, but we're not here to eat. Although there's some food out here. I don't know the level of the coffee. I know the tea's pretty good at this restaurant. I don't know that we're here for good jokes, right, Fred? There's some real, I mean, there's, you know, deep in our soul, what each of us desires, wants more than anything out of life is the gift of God. We want the gift of God. You know, you think about that, and it's not something from God. The gift of God is not something from God. The gift of God is the gift of God. We want the gift of God. We have the gift of God. We've got everything else. Jesus says it's kind of like living water. It flows. It happens. And you know where the gift of God comes from? It comes whenever you're willing to give water to someone else. The irony is, I'm giving you the gift of God when you give me water. When you give what you're able to give, the gift of God is yours. Don't you know? Jesus said, when you can give a cup of cold water, you're giving the gift of God. When you give what you have to give, the gift of God is yours. God shows up. How often has it been when you've gone to a hospital to cheer someone up and the miracle is reversed? You're not cheering up anyone. You've been ministered to. Somehow the gift of God has come to you because there is a person who somehow God has worked in and they have a message for you. It's this remarkable thing whenever we think that somehow we are the source of blessing. God turns it around on us and says, I want to give to you. I want to give back to you. Well, the woman says, well, you have nothing to draw with. The well is deep. How can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and livestock? You know, it seems like a lot of times when Jesus was speaking, people misunderstood what he was saying. Nicodemus, this Pharisee, came to Jesus, and Jesus said, you've got to be born again. And he said, how can you be born again? I mean, when you're old, it just does, going after the literal, the physical, when the spiritual is really what's all about. And maybe he understood a little bit more than what he let on, and maybe this woman understood a little bit more than she let on. Maybe she didn't want to go there. Have you ever gotten in a conversation, somebody wants to go down deep and you just don't want to go there? So you kind of push it aside a little bit. I think maybe that was what was going on. Jesus said, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I will give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. And that spring is not for ourselves, but it's for others. The spring is so that we have something to give, so that we don't run dry when we give. We can give and give some more. And when that water is springing up, when the water is running, then we have something to give. In fact, one of my prayers at HarborPointe always is that we might know the love of God enough so we have something left over to give to those around us. That's what we are here to receive, but it's what we're here to give as well. Somehow the miracle happens when the water is beginning to flow in this way. And Jesus says, eternal life is not what happens after you die. It happens right now. It's the life of abundance that I want for you right now. And the woman says, well, I'd like to get this kind of water. Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. I want this. But Jesus goes on to say, go call your husband and come back. Have no husband, she replies. And Jesus said to her, you're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands. The man you now have is not your husband. What have you just said is quite true. You know, one of the problems we have in church is that we put on enough of a face to get us by, right? The problem is we're pretty messed up. How many people are more messed up than you let on? How many of you are a lot more messed up than you let on? I mean, this is yeah. Who let Linwood in the doors, by the way? I thought we said that he wasn't allowed in. This is a, you know, I know. I have this sneaking suspicion that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be very close to Jesus because of pure and simple, they haven't kept the mask so solidly in place. They can say, I have had 5 husbands. I'm essentially a prostitute. This is who I am, and this is what I'm really like. And Jesus, the remarkable thing is that Jesus says, it doesn't matter how messed up you are. The more messed up you are, the more I love you. He was trying to get to the heart of the fact that we think that somehow we're lovable when we're good enough. And Jesus said, no, that's not the issue at all. You're most lovable when you're most messed up, because I want the Spirit of God inside of you. That's why he spent time with tax collectors and prostitutes and all kinds of people on the edge of life. He says, I love you when you're messed up. So don't run from me because don't wait until you're good enough. Church was never designed for good enough people. It's designed for messed up people. And so Jesus tried to get the heart of it, but she still couldn't handle that. So she comes up with a theological kind of question. Sir, I can see that you're a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on the mountain, but you Jews claim the place where we must worship is Jerusalem. The mountain she's talking about is Gerizim. Back in the days of Moses, he pulled the Israelites together. He had some sit on one side, which was by Mount Gerizim, which was a mount of blessing, and others on Mount Ebal, which was a mount of cursing. And so so what the Samaritans did is says, we are the people of Mount Gerizim, the mount of blessing. And the inference was the Jews are on the Mount of Ebal, the Mount of cursing. So this is kind of insinuated, kind of put down. This is what understanding is. And your worship in Jerusalem is second rate. Jesus goes on to say, I don't want to even go there. Woman, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain or in Jerusalem. That's not the issue. Don't get involved in a theological debate. That's not what I'm after. How many of us have got hung up on some kind of theological debate and have lost sight of the living God? We've missed it. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father is seeking. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and truth. And there's been a lot of discussion about what that means, to worship in spirit and truth. And this is what I think. And of course, I could be wrong. Once or twice I've been wrong before. Don't tell my wife that, but this is what my understanding of spirit and truth is all about. I think truth is not referring to doctrine. I don't think truth we've got the right doctrine, so we're worshiping in truth. And I've heard that before. I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue of truth has to do with honesty. I think truth has to do with integrity. One of the greatest compliments I ever received, I had a psychologist friend, and he said, I don't know what this reference was, but it just stuck in my head. He said, Tom, you reek of integrity. And I said, I don't like the idea of reeking, but if it's integrity, I think we can't worship unless integrity and honesty are at the core of our being. I don't think we worship without integrity and honesty. I don't think that can be. We worship with integrity and honesty. We can't worship with deceit and having masks and trying to shroud ourselves in some kind of light that we're not real. I think the Spirit has to do with openness. The Spirit of God opens us up. I'm not sure. I heard a voice. I think the Spirit of God opens us. It opens us to new things and new people and new places. I think, Linwood, you were talking a little bit this morning about how this would have been the last place in the world you would have been on a Sunday morning just a few years ago. And something has opened you to something new. You can't worship unless there's an openness. It's an openness, and I think this is the thing. It's a continual openness. Once we ever get to that place where we said, well, I've kind of got it now. I've got it all. And so I can be closed and closed-minded, and don't bother me with the facts. Don't bother me with another way of looking at things. Just keep me, because I want to stay where I'm at. The Spirit of God opens us up. We're open. All of a sudden, our eyes can be open to something new. We can be called to something new. Integrity, honesty, and openness. Honesty and openness. It's powerful forces, but I think this is what God is looking for. This is the worship he wants from us, is honesty and openness. He wants worship. He's looking for people like that. He's seeking us right now in honesty and openness. That's what he's looking for. I had a friend, I've told a story, several people, got this friend from way back who I've reconnected with. It's kind of an interesting story. I was checking the mail, and the mail had over flooded. I can't believe that administratively I didn't have everything, all my ducks in a row, but the mail somehow had gotten, I hadn't opened it up, and there was this, it was flooding out. So I said, somebody, maybe the pastor should even open up that box and take the mail. We had not checked the mail. I shouldn't say this really, but we had not checked it all summer long. I mean, I can't believe that's the case. There were bills, but you know what? And this is what was remarkable. There was also in there a check, and more than one check actually, but there was a check, and I didn't realize it. I was just opening up, and I saw that it was from this person who recognized the name, but I had not heard or seen this person in 40 years. Check, and Ann found the phone number. I called. It was my old friend from high school. He said he had found me online and started listening to the messages. He says he's been listening to a message every Sunday, so he may be listening to this message right now. But he said to me, Tom, it doesn't surprise me that you're doing what you're doing, that you're a pastor. And I said, what surprises me is that God can speak to an old friend 40 years ago and get us reconnected. What surprises me is that there can be openness. There can be openness to the Spirit of God that moves us in strange and unusual ways. That there can be things that can happen to us 40 years ago that impact our life today. Just strange how God desires us to be, and way beyond our conception, way beyond the way we put things into practice. We have this thing called God in our life, the gift of God in our life. And he invites us today to be open. And it may be that you're supposed to connect to somebody from 40 years ago. Maybe you're supposed to go out to Buckrow Beach and find a sun-baked person. Maybe you're supposed to pick up your guitar from Suffolk and from a lot of constraints and make it across the water. Maybe the Spirit of God is just moving inside of you. But openness and honesty, openness and integrity. God's looking for openness and integrity. He's looking for worshipers, because it's the road less traveled. Not many people are doing this, I don't think. There are not many people who are worshiping, because it's taken that road less traveled to Samaria. Lord, I pray that as we gather here today, that you're gonna just speak to our souls. We have this miracle called life that we're a part of, and we're connecting, and you're doing something. Things are happening, but we so often just want to shut it down. And Lord, help us to be open, and help us to be honest. Help us to be open and honest as we walk this road. As we walk this road less traveled. In Jesus' name, amen.